Face rolling is what happens in a game when a player does the same action over and over without considering alternatives. For whatever reason, the game isn't presenting the player with the choices that are interesting or meaningful enough to change their mind. As the saying goes, they might as well just bind every key to that one action and roll their face across their keyboard. After all, it's a much better use of the head than thinking would be. Face rolling is the breakdown of the importance in player choices, which is a breakdown in what makes a game in the first place. When you hear a game developer say something like, "Yeah, we intended for players to face roll through our game," it's the equivalent of a chef saying, "Yeah, we intended to randomly smear the ingredients all over the kitchen." What's the point of intending that? The gameplay will tend toward face rolling just like a closed thermodynamic system will tend toward maximum entropy and least action. Fighting this tendency is the difficult part, and it's the whole purpose of design. Choices need to be interesting and they need to matter, or the game has failed to be a game. A game creates a demand for actions and a supply of actions with which to meet that demand. The player is the connection between that supply and demand. If supply differs too much from demand, the result is a loss of gameplay complexity. High supply and low demand makes player choices meaningless and enables face rolling. High demand and low supply make player choices uninteresting and forces face rolling. Here's an analogy. Imagine the game is a maze. Each intersection is a choice. Too many walls and you start eliminating portions of the maze until the choices are uninteresting. Too many spaces and you open up the maze so much that the choices are meaningless. Building the maze is an optimization puzzle. Developers often think that they are enriching the game when they are actually ignoring one side of this equation. For example, if the demand for actions is high but the supply of actions is low, players are forced to deal with the excess demand using a blunt instrument of sorts. If there are just too many bullets or the bullets move too fast, players will be forced to deal with them in bulk rather than individually, which might not be the intention of the game developers. A developer isn't going to create a bunch of unique hazards and then say, "Oh, players are meant to just ignore that." But if players lack the tools to react to game mechanics at the rate those mechanics are thrown at them, what do you expect? Keep in mind, human visual reflexes are rarely faster than 0.2 seconds. Now throw in latency and animation locking. A sign of overly high action demand is anticipation over reaction, meaning players need to make choices before being given adequate forewarning. Hey look, a lot of enemies. Better mash all my defensive abilities before wildly charging into them. An extreme example of this is the beginner's trap, where players cannot react and always fail on the first try. The camera of the game poses challenges too. In isometric games, everything is the same distance from view. It's harder to make important things stand out, unlike first-person games where your view is naturally biased, and you can see things farther away but not behind you. If players can't make use of what they see or hear, all that action demand is wasted. Sometimes there's too much action supply and not enough demand, like when you have 20 abilities but the game doesn't even have 20 different things that can happen. The gameplay lacks the depth necessary to differentiate the options. Bad power scaling is a common reason for this. Players might just be too powerful to need all the choices they have, so they just pick one over and over again. But this isn't always the case. Sometimes power scaling can be fine, but gameplay still suffers. For example, it might take 14 different buttons to fight an enemy, but nothing the enemy does requires you to change the order you press those buttons in. Your brain is doing one thing over and over. If players aren't considering the full depth of options presented to them, all that action supply is wasted. Games are a complicated web of choices. For those choices to be interesting, there must be trade-offs between them that can't be easily compared. That way the agency of the player remains intact. It's important, though, that one choice not bias future choices too heavily, or you might as well combine them all together. All it takes to linearize player choices like this is to allow them to spam certain abilities. What, did you expect to feel like a rogue when you can spam your backstab? How about making backstab hit a large area? Surprise! Something very frustrating about face rolling is that from far away, it might not show up on the radar. Players could be progressing through the game at a reasonable rate and playing all the classes at the same frequency, but the moment-to-moment choices players make aren't important. Here's a very common trap that games fall into. Snowballing. When some action becomes more appealing the more it's taken, or less appealing the less it's taken, it becomes part of a positive feedback loop we call a snowball. Even if choices started out balanced, snowballing is guaranteed to goof it up if nothing puts the brakes on it. Here are two different kinds of mechanics relevant to this topic: win more effects and lose less effects. A win more effect is better for the player when they already have an advantage, leading to positive feedback loops. A lose less effect is better when they already have a disadvantage, leading to negative feedback loops. Win more effects cause players to win even more if they're already winning, like dealing more damage to incapacitated enemies or getting some buff after defeating an enemy. In short, they further incentivize something a player is already trying to do, such as deal tons of damage. Look at Life Leech. The more damage a player does, the more they heal themselves. The more they heal themselves, the less risky it becomes to do more damage. If every player is focusing all their effort on damage, the best defense is a good offense, chances are too many mechanics are tied to damage. Sound familiar? More damage could mean more stuns mean more damage opportunity, and more stuns, and so on. Lose less effects are needed to put the win more snowballs on a spring. They're better if the player is losing. Things like combo breakers, defensive rolls, control diminishing returns, and low life and rage fall under this category. However, lose less effects tend to be less prevalent than win more effects. It turns out players like to win, so if given the choice, win more will have the default appeal in the short run. All developers have to do is favor this appeal and end up destabilizing the game in the long run. Small differences get amplified and otherwise similar players end up incompatible. Let's take a look at the broad category of really common mechanics that, not all the time, but often, provide a cover for vacuous gameplay. Look at all that stuff on the screen. Is all that stuff worth the precious space it takes up? It might be time to re-examine staple concepts, to imagine how player choices are really influenced by them. Take mana, for example. What if you just outright removed it from the game? Is there a big difference? Is there no difference? Is the game better or worse? The point is, merely having a blue thing on the screen doesn't automatically add depth to the game. It must provide useful information, too. It must have the capacity of changing a player's mind. Everything has to explain its existence, especially traditional mechanics. Element types, resource types, equipment slots, skill trees, all those buffs and debuffs. What value do they have to the gameplay? Are players paying any attention to them, or do they just boil down to a couple of clicks in some menu somewhere? Do my choices really change when I put on that 4% chance to gain a 10% chance to gain 7% critical hit chance for 3 seconds amulet? Is it really interesting to cast that +2 strength for 30 seconds buff every 30 seconds? I mean, slots at the casino have a ton of stuff going on, right? Complexity! By the way, if you want face rolling, try giving your random number generator more agency than the players have. Choice will rapidly become irrelevant if you give chance the final say in important things. Long story short, the only valid answer to the question, why is this thing determined by RNG, is because we couldn't think of anything better. All other answers are variations of the gambler's fallacy. Modern gaming has become less about surmounting challenges and more about maintaining tutorial levels of face rolling. All the pretty graphics are displacing the substance. Gamers want to get better at games they like. They want to get more damage, more life, more speed, more power in general. Superficially, it might look like the road toward face rolling is what everybody wants to be on, but think about the first time you used a cheat code in a game you liked. Because of how challenging the game was, now you can appreciate having the cheat, but then you burn out really fast. This is a paradox of game design that will never go away. Players don't want to hold themselves back, they want the game to. They crave the challenge, all the while trying their best to break it. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish the feeling of getting better from the game getting easier, but one of them will keep players coming back. the other will not.